Hello there, Alaskans, wherever you are. Welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show. Coming to you from somewhere in Alaska. This is the place where we talk about, you guessed it, Alaska. Where we keep the mainstream media on their toes and where we are standing up for what's right in a world run by leftists. You can find out more by heading over to mustreadalaska.com and also checking out the Must Read Alaska YouTube channel for some really great content. But first, let's get this party started.
Welcome, everybody, to the Must Read Alaska Show. I'm your host, John Quick, coming to you live from somewhere in Alaska. And you all have, you've like won the Grammys today because you get a three-peat. You get 3 episodes in one day. This is quite the, it's a fun thing to do. And I hope that everybody has appreciated it. I'm sure that you have. I've gotten the text and the emails already that you've enjoyed the first 2. So this next episode, we have a very special guest today, Senator Kaufman from Anchorage. He is famous for, I believe, his spending cap hat. A lot of folks around the state know him for that, but we get to kind of do a deep dive into how he thinks session went, what he's up to this summer, and any thoughts that he sees moving forward, because he's got several years left on his term, I believe. So without further ado, Senator Kaufman, welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me on the show today.
So glad you could join us. So you were in the majority this year. Talk to me about how that went, how maybe it was, coming from the House and now you're in the Senate majority. Talk to me about maybe some of those differences and how you think it went this year being in the majority.
It was definitely an interesting transition to be a House freshman minority member, in my first term, and then find myself a Senate majority member. Definitely completely different operational consideration, different being in the majority than the minority. For one is you have a little bit better chance, one would hope, of moving some of your, key goals and objectives along, things that you're trying to get done. And the Senate is just a different animal. It operates I guess more efficiently because you've got half as many people. So you just don't have 40 personalities clamoring for attention. You've got 20, and so it's just a different place to be in, and you have to try and get a handle on that pretty quick. And so I think I did all right in the House. We managed to get some legislation passed, even though we were in the minority. Passed a couple of good bills that were, one was our document reduction bill to get rid of unneeded reports. That was HB 187, and some other key legislation that we were able to get done. And then, this year in the minority or in the majority, because of the way caucusing went, where we ended up with the 17-member supermajority. So I came in at the tail end of that. I had the decision whether or not to basically, be on the sidelines or get in the middle of it and do my best. And so I made that decision. And so we ended up, with my addition to it, 17-member majority, which is interesting because there's such a broad range of different political perspectives in that group. But I think to the credit of the leadership, a lot of the legislation that was progressed was they tried to stick to things that people could agree upon in general. There's some stuff that was maybe a little more contentious, but it created an opportunity for some kind of centrist sort of things, like a bill I passed. It was Senate Bill 123 to reduce barriers to entry to getting truck driver, professional drivers training, commercial CDL license. So we were able to get some, I guess, just some simple get or done type legislation passed, and by kind of staying in the center of what people could agree upon. So passed a number of bills unanimously through the House and Senate, and so I feel overall we made some good progress. There's certainly things that are challenging issue-wise and all that, but I think we managed to move some reasonable legislation this year.
Nice. So let's chat briefly about kind of how the end of session played out. I think I'd love to hear your take on it. I think I've heard from lots of people that they were disappointed in how the end of session went with the handoff to the House, feeling like that it was, not giving the House long enough to do the business that it needed to do, and hence a special session was called. So, but I'd love to hear your take on how the end of session went and what your thought process was behind that.
Well, I would have liked to have seen, I guess, a more, usual exchange, or at least what I understand to be usual. I don't have that long of a history in the body, so I'm, to some extent, when you hear about what's normal, you can only judge it against what you've seen. So this being my third session that I've been involved in, the first two, and now my first one in the Senate, I think I would have liked to have seen more of the collegial exchange of the respective budgets, from body to body, the so-called turducken budget strategy. I guess it is what it is, with the benefit of the Senate budget being that it did balance without a dip into the CBR, which was a key point of contention, and it was what was keeping the House version of the budget, which required that CBR vote. So it was a vote that avoided that CBR vote, and I like that part of it. But as far as the whole process of how to transfer the budgets back and forth between the body and all that, I'd like to get to something that was a little bit more collegial, if we can.
I like that. I think that you're hit the nail right on the head there. I think, maybe next year it plays out a little differently, and I think both sides being willing to meet in the middle and figure out what they can do better next time is a big part of that. So I appreciate your perspective on that. Let's chat about spending cap. I think that's one of the things that I've followed some of the things you've done the last 3 years. A lot of your bills that you introduce and get passed are common sense bills that maybe cut red tape or make it easier for people to do a certain thing or get rid of redundancies, i.e. the backlog of paperwork stuff. But one of the things that you've kind of talked about since day one is this spending cap. So give us your thoughts on spending cap. Has it evolved since, you first ran 4 years ago to where you are now? And what would you like to see have happen?
Well, for those that are not familiar with it, my spending cap proposal is that we begin to measure our private sector economic activity. We average that measurement for a 5-year trailing average, and then we set our spending at a healthy percentage of that. So not too much, not too little. And so all of that is, so as far as the private sector economic measurements and the 5-year trailing average and the percentages, those are contained in my SJR 4 and SB 20. So there's a constitutional resolution to create the constitutional piece of the cap, and then there is the statutory piece to create the statutory. And so the SJR and the SB, so the resolution and the bill, they work together. So that's SJR 4 and SB 20. And for folks that are following along, all of this is on my website, senatorkaufman.com. There's a spending cap proposal tab there. So what I'm trying to do is get it where we do a better job of estimating what we can actually spend by tying it to our private sector economic activity. And a key reason for that is that I believe the state needs to, in our spending, we need to be more anchored to our broad-based economic potential. Right now, we estimate what oil prices will be, and we kind of aim at that, and we're often wrong. And then we start to build our budget around that. I think it'll be a more stable prospect if we were to use a 5-year trailing average of economic activity, and then set a reasonable percentage of that we could actually spend. So I've been working on that it was a proposal that I fleshed out in general, broad picture perspective. When I was running for the House, it was a cap was a key part of my campaign. And since then, we've gotten many hearings, and I've split it off. This year, we had a Representative Will Stapp was carrying the House version of it, and he got it as far in the first session as far as Senate Finance. And so it's gone through 3 committees of referral in the House. Over in the Senate, where folks are a little bit more circumspect about it, I've gotten a hearing in Judiciary, but we're continuing to push on it. The big story, though, I think, is not really in the building, so to speak, within the legislature. It's the work that we're doing outside the building, with the business community, and just at large with the people, to try and create better awareness of what life could be like if we had a cap like this that just does a better job of measuring our economic activity and takes us away from the harsh ups and downs of spending. It's not a cap so much as a cut. It's a cap that moderates our spending so that we don't get into trouble overspending when we get extra revenues in that could be swept forward and used to not only fund government, but also capital projects. We could begin to have a more stable supply of revenue for that. And I'm not mentioning the dividend, because in my cap, the dividend was always intended to be resolved through a separate piece of legislation at the constitutional or legislative level. So I don't include the PFD within the cap. It's more of the other government operational and capital project spending.
So what, you got a crystal ball in front of you. Do you think this is does it have a fair shot? Does it get a fair shot this coming session 2024?
I think it's possible, but big ideas like this, especially ideas that constrain the legislature, but they're not necessarily going to move just because they're a great idea. Usually there has to be other leveraging forces at work. So what I foresee if it passes, or when it passes, it'll be part of a set of other reforms. And I've got a couple of those that I'd like to talk about too a little bit. There's a few other reforms that we can do, but other people have different revenue ideas, which pretty much, there's new revenue, which is like a new opportunity. Sometimes the term revenue is used, and it really just means more taxes on existing activity. So people have different ideas for how to fund things, but my mantra has been and will continue to be not without a functional spending cap. I don't feel we need to go seeking new sources of revenue or additional taxes unless we've got some kind of controls on the barn door and we don't let the thing run away with us. So I think it's an important piece of leverage for all of these other prospects that are being talked about.
So what's been the biggest lesson learned from your time in office, from running, 4 years ago to being in the House, 2 sessions to now being in the Senate? What's been one of the biggest lessons you've learned along the way?
I would say that, one is, of course, very few people come into this with an intimate understanding of the process and how to effectively engage in that process. Now, I feel like I'm going to say we, because whenever I'm talking about what I'm doing, it's always my office and the people that are in there working hard every day with me to get where we're trying to go. So as an office, I would say what we've learned is, of course, the process. And then, in the legislature, there's politics, there's personality, and there's process. And you have to get all of that to line up and be able, to explain to people what you're doing. You have to try and offset any sense of concerns that they might have, because every new idea always brings the sense that people, what are you trying to do here? What's the downside of all this? So you have to be able to explain. And I guess it's communication, because anytime you're moving something along, you're trying to push those three levers of is it good policy? What are the politics of it? And what are the personalities that you're going to have to deal with? And so how can you work those three things to try and move things along? And again, I think we've done pretty well in that arena, because we have managed to pass a number of very good bills, and we've gotten multiple unanimous votes on them. And so that's a good sign that kind of, the learning curve, as tough as it is, it can be mastered. And I think we're doing a good job of getting where we can actually be effective. You mentioned, the big bills and the little bills. I have a core policy that I call diet and exercise, and that's the spending cap that we talked about, and that's the diet plan. The exercise plan for Alaska is our Executive Budget Act reforms, which transforms our annual budgeting process into a performance-driven process where we're working on 4-year strategic operating plans, and the budgeting process is the annual funding against that performance management plan. And so if we can get a cap that controls our worst excesses in spending, and we can get the Executive Budget Act reforms done, we'll have performance managed government that is operating on a better process for determining how much we can spend every year. And then, so those are big ideas. They're hard to move. They're multi-year, multi-session, multi-term type ideas that take time to socialize. But then the smaller things that we're doing, those that we referred to, such as our bill that passed that reduces unneeded accounts. So we passed that. It passed unanimously. So we're actually sweeping accounts that we no longer need and closing those accounts out.
And that's got to be what, millions of dollars, probably.
Yes, it can be. Now, some of the money we had some failures of the reverse sweep, which defunded some of them. But going forward, what this bill sets up, it is every 2 years, the process of going back through our accounts and closing out ones that their purpose is no longer there. Sometimes we'll pass legislation that preempts the need for an account that was created 10 years ago, but the account will sit there. So with this new little bill that we just passed successfully, it will every 2 years there will be a review done by finance, and they'll say, here's the accounts we recommend sweeping and closing as a biennial. In other words, every 2-year cleanup process. So you start to put little mechanisms in place like that, even while you're seeking the larger reforms that will improve the general framework. But we can still do these small improvements around waste reduction, cost reduction, as you mentioned, reducing redundancy, or for the public, reducing barriers to entry that government creates, such as what we did with our SB 123, the commercial driver's license bill.
So talk to me about, what does next year look like for you? I think, lots of people that are even following politics, they often have the question of, do you guys have to reorganize, or do you guys just organize every 2 years or 4 years? What does that look like when you guys show back up to Juneau in 2024? Do you start from scratch? Do you just keep the same majority that you had before? What does that look like?
Yeah, so we were in session, and that was the beginning session of the 2-year legislative cycle. And so the organization occurred, for the House and Senate. And when we come back, all things, continuing as they are, we'll be in the same organizational structure. Although in the past there have been coups, so to speak, where things happen. I don't anticipate that, but other than that rare event, generally you're organized for the legislative term which, the 2 years.
Yep.
So it won't be until the next election that typically that there is an opportunity to organize or reorganize.
Nice. Well, our 25 minutes has gone by in a flash. Any last minute thoughts here before we head off here, Senator Kaufman?
Well, no, just want to say thank you. And as always, if folks want to know what we're doing, there's a lot, John, that we didn't talk about what we're doing in transportation to try and reform the marine highway system and to help assure that the port of Alaska and Anchorage, that project goes well. So we're doing a lot. I'm the chair of Senate Transportation. And maybe we can come back and do this again soon this summer and talk about some of that, because we're doing a lot on that this interim. And if folks want to keep in touch, of course, I'm on Facebook. That's Senator Kaufman with a Kaufman. My website, senatorkaufman.com, has information about everything we talked about here, but also more. So I invite folks to visit that website.
Awesome. Yes, I would love to have you back on this sometime this Senator Kaufman, to talk about the ferry system and the Anchorage port. I think that those are two huge problems that nobody has been able to fix or solve. And so I would love to hear about what you're doing. We'll have you back on in a month or so.
Let's plan on it, especially with the ferry system. There's a big story to tell there of what we're doing around kind of the improvement, the oversight, and also the federal money that's coming in, and which is driving a lot of why we're focusing on it. So I think that'll be a great thing to have a chat about.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate the work you're doing, Senator Kaufman, and you're welcome on anytime. We'll have you here on again in a month or so. And we appreciate everybody listening, watching, and reading Must Read Alaska. If you want to help keep the lights on here at Must Read Alaska, just head over to mustreadalaska.com. On the right-hand side, there's a little donate button. Every $5, $10, $100 gift helps keep the lights on here at Must Read Alaska. We're not funded by some dark web nonprofit money conglomerate. We're just funded by everyday folks who care about the conservative side of the news. So if that is you, we want to thank you for doing that. And until next time, I'm John Quick from somewhere in Alaska. Thank you so much, Senator.
Take care. Thanks, John.